Hello, everyone. Let's discuss standard deviation. But before I proceed with standard deviation, I'd want you all to have a quick look at the syllabus from paper 2, that is research methods. Now, standard deviation comes under the heading of data analysis, right? What exactly is this data analysis? What all is it that is expected from us to know as a student from a data analysis? Number one, you should be able to present and interpret data in tables. Number two, you should be able to understand the meaning of measures of central tendency. Measures of central tendency, we use this term measures of central tendency to refer to mean, median, mode. And you've studied all of this during your O levels, right? Number three, you should be able to name, recognize, and know how to find measures of central tendency. Remember, no calculation would be required, right? Number four, you should be able to understand the meaning of measures of spread. Now, on one end, we have measures of central tendency, that is mean, median, and mode. And on the other hand, we have measures of spread, that is range and standard deviation. Now you should be able to name, recognize, and know how to find the range. You should be able to recognize, interpret, and understand standard deviation. You should additionally be able to name, recognize, draw, change, and interpret data from bar charts, histogram, and scattergraph, which again you've studied during your O levels. Now, remember, candidates will not be required to carry out any calculations, no calculations whatsoever. One. Number two, candidates will not be required to understand or interpret statistical tests or findings other than as specified. So I think these 2 points especially would be would help you stay relaxed before you go sit for your paper. Now, to begin with, what is standard deviation? Standard deviation is, like I'd mentioned earlier, a measure of spread. This measure of spread is used in conjunction with the mean. This is used with the mean, right? Standard deviation, if I put it in a simple manner, let's just say we have a range of data over here, and this is, I'm trying to show this in green. Yeah, these are different data sets that we have, right? Now, we initially we try to find out the mean for this, right? We have a data set over here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 numbers, right? Out of these 7 numbers, let's try taking out the average, and let's just say the average or the mean stands over here. What is standard deviation now? The distance from the mean to a particular point. Let's just say this is A, this is A, this is B, this is C, this is D, this is E, this is F, this is G, right? This is a data set you have. Standard deviation is the distance from the mean. I'll pick up another color. Yeah. So the distance from the mean to a particular point. This is a standard deviation. This distance would be the standard deviation. This distance would be the standard deviation. This distance would be the standard deviation, right? Likewise, this one, this one, this one. Again, you do not have anything of this. You do not have to do anything like this in your paper, right? There would be no such question. I'll show you a couple of questions that we've had on standard deviation before. Now, standard deviation is the measure of spread that is used in conjunction with the mean. This measures the spread of data, Remember, standard deviation comes under the heading of measure of spread, right? The spread of data around the mean point. Now, have a look at this again. This is the mean point. How spread out is the data from the mean point is your measure of is standard deviation. Now, taking this ahead, it is easier to interpret a standard deviation if you have 2 or more data sets to compare, right? We had multiple data sets that I showed you. For example, say that you have timed males and females on the ability to solve a maze. Your results are shown in the table below. So we have an example over here. I'm just helping you understand through this example. This example over here says you as a researcher have timed males and females on their ability to solve a maze, right? The ability to solve a maze, we're talking about a comparison between males and females over here. The results are over here. Let's just say for females, the mean is, or the average is 68.4 seconds. For males, the average is 69.3 seconds. Do you realize both of these results that you have, they are pretty similar to each other? I mean, they're pretty close to each other, right? Now, however, if I look at the standard deviation over here shows for females, this is 3.9 seconds. For males, this is 10.4 seconds. Now, if you have a closer look, the difference between the mean isn't much. However, the difference between standard deviation is a lot. I'll explain this to you now. The means are similar, like I said. On average, females and males solve mazes in roughly the same females and males solve mazes in roughly the same time. However, the standard deviation is telling us that the results for females have less spread around the mean than the results from for males. So for females, the spread is less. For females, the spread is less. Let's just say this hand, the hand with the wristwatch, this hand, this is the mean over here, right? For females, the spread is less. For males, the spread is more, right? Now have a look at this. I'm talking about a comparison between these two numbers, right? Taking this ahead, this is because for the results for females, the standard deviation is smaller. Many of the females would have completed the maze around this mean time of 68.4 seconds. So 68.4 seconds, as we see over here, is the mean time for females. Now, when we say the result is less spread out, that means all the females that all the females that we had in this data set, they were able to solve this maze around the same time, right? Many of the females would have completed the maze around the mean time of 68.4 seconds. However, for the males, the data set is much more spread out. Therefore, there were some males who were much slower than the 69.3 seconds average to solve the maze, but there were some males who solved it much faster. So for males, the spread was more, right? Could be in either direction, this direction, or could be in the other direction as well. Now, this measure of spread is normally used when the data is an interval or a ratio. The main advantage of standard deviation now, look at this one carefully, understand this one carefully, because you have had questions in the CIs where the examiner has demanded or required for you to give an advantage of the usage of standard deviation. So the main advantage of the standard deviation of the range is that it takes every score into account. Did you see I was taking every score into account over here? I'm not sure if I could find that. Okay, I don't think I'd be, oh, I did find it. Now, did you see each data set over here has been taken into account, right? Each data set has been taken into account over here. That's exactly what we're talking about. So this measure of spread, where it go? This measure of spread is normally used when the data is an interval or ratio. The main advantage of the standard deviation over the range is that it takes every score into account and therefore provides a representation of variation within the data set, and therefore provides a representation of variation within the data set, right? Now, two things that you need to understand. The main advantage is that the main advantage standard deviation has over range is that it takes every score into account. Like I said, this is taking every score into account. Had we spoken about the range could have simply been between this and this, between A and G, right? Two extremes. This would have been the range, right? Taking this ahead, as it is not just considering the extremes, and is not distorted by outliers like the range would be. Taking this ahead, understanding the meanings of measures of spread. A measure of spread gives information about the range of scores attained by participants in a study. It helps to see whether certain groups of participants were scoring roughly the same, like it was for females, right? Or whether there was wide variation between participants in that particular group. Therefore, when calculating any measures of spread, a higher score means that the participant score was spread widely across the group, whereas a smaller score means that the scores were more consistent or they were more closer to the mean, to the average, right? I'm sorry. Now, what I was saying is standard deviation, if you put it in a simple manner, is the extent to which your data is, I'll show this to you through a question that we've had. So the extent to which your data varies or your data is spread out or your data is dispersed of the scores around the mean, right? Around the mean. If this is the mean, how spread out your data is from the mean, right? Now, having a quick look at the questions, at a couple of questions that we've had on standard deviation before. Now, I'm just showing these questions to you because I've seen many students finding this super challenging. I wonder what the reason is. I've seen students being scared of data analysis. I've seen students being scared of standard deviation. This video is just to help you ease out. Now, taking this ahead, what does standard deviation mean? It's a 2-mark question. 1 mark for identifying that it is a measure of spread or dispersion. The 2nd mark for explaining that it shows how varied scores are around the mean. Is this not what we just spoke about, right? Taking this ahead, Explain why it would have been better for Milgram to calculate the standard deviation rather than the range. Remember, towards the end, we spoke about how using standard deviation is a better option as compared to using range. Remember, they're both measures of spread. Now, relative advantage of standard deviation or disadvantage of the range, you give a partial explanation, you get 1 mark. You give a full explanation, you get 2 marks. For instance, the range does not indicate how the results are distributed between the extremes. It does not provide information about the spread around the mean. Example, you would not know how many people gave closer to 300 or gave 450 volts with the range. Moving on to another question. The question over here says, this is again from the CA, the question over here reads, state what the standard deviation means. Standard deviation is the variation, the spread, the dispersion of scores around the mean. It shows how different the participants' scores were from each other. State one advantage of using the standard deviation rather than the range. We just spoke about this. A possible point could be the standard deviation takes every score into account, so is less influenced by outliers. The standard deviation gives a representative measure of the variation of the whole group's scores. It is better than the range, which only includes the largest and smallest scores. Now, even when we just have a 1 mark question, even if you would have had a 3 mark question, this would have been enough. This would have been more than enough, right? Taking this ahead, another question from the CIs that says, state one advantage of using the standard deviation compared to the range as a measure of spread. We just spoke about a similar question a minute earlier. Another question that is linked to the study by Baron Cohen et al. In the study by Baron Cohen et al., standard deviations were calculated on the autism spectrum quotient. Scores are shown in table 4.1. So this question is from the study that was conducted by Baron Cohen et al. We're talking about how standard deviations scores were calculated on the autism spectrum quotient, AQ, if you remember. Now, if you have a look at this table, now I've seen many students being scared of tables and numerical data on the paper. Don't be, just read it. You just read it once thoroughly, you'd understand it. Now, standard deviation scores of AQ for Asperger syndrome or high functioning autism group, that is group 1, that comprised of individuals who were autistic, group number 1, compared to IQ match group. If you remember, this was group number 4, right? So these are scores. These are the standard deviation scores. We see for Asperger syndrome for participants, that is for participants who had Asperger syndrome or who had high functioning autism, or the autistic group participants, the group 1 participants, standard deviation for them is 6, right? However, for the IQ match group, standard deviation is 2.0. What do we understand from here? For the autistic participants, the standard deviation was more as compared to the IQ match group, right? Explain what the information in table 4.1 indicates about the results of these findings. The bigger the standard deviation, that is this one, the bigger the standard deviation, the more spread out the scores in the data set would be around the mean. So the ASHFA, that is the autistic group, were more variable in their AQ scores than the IQ match group. It is this simple. So another question that we have over here, this is a novel research situation question. The question over here reads, Kate is using a questionnaire to investigate how participants could feel about people who are older than them. How participants feel about people who are older to them. The emotions she is investigating are boredom, empathy, fear, and happiness. There are 4 different emotions that we have written down over here. Understand the situation, read through this. Kate is using a questionnaire to investigate how participants could feel about people who are older than them, right? The emotions she is investigating are 4. They're boredom, empathy, fear, and happiness. Having a look at the question, Kate measures how strongly the participants feel each emotion about people who are older than them using scores from 0 to 10. If I quickly move on to the question on standard deviation over here, this one, it reads, Kate calculated the standard deviation of scores for each emotion. The standard deviations are as below. For emotions, there were 4 different emotions: boredom, empathy, fear, and happiness, right? Standard deviation scores 1.4, 3.2, 2.2, 2.6. Explain which emotion has the widest spread. Of course, this one has the widest spread. It very easily shows, right? So empathy has the widest spread because this has the largest or the highest standard deviation. Showing these scores had the most variation, or in other words, dispersion. So this is how simple it would be. Of course, standard deviation has a lot more than this, but if you know this, this is more than enough for you to not miss not miss a mark on any question on standard deviation in your paper. I hope this has helped. Thank you.